I want to ask you a really important question. What is peace of mind and how important is it when it comes to healing trauma? This is what I'll get into in this video because the answer to that question distinctly shapes everything about your healing. In this video, I'll tell you why you have so many thoughts, how they keep you in a state of trauma, and how to develop a peaceful mind. And let me start by stating that true peace of mind is when your mind is empty of thoughts and you're unaware of yourself. But for those living with trauma, it's probably been an awfully long time since you've experienced such a beautiful moment. Instead, your mind is acting in service to your protector parts. And if you remember, parts are coping mechanisms that we have developed through necessity and usually in childhood. So, for example, a child might strategize that doing things really well reduces the possibility of negative feedback. She may think that if she scores 10 out of 10 in her spellings each week, then her father won't tell her off. Because when he tells her off, he can sometimes get angry. And when he gets angry, that makes her scared. And feeling scared is too painful to cope with. They're scary feelings, and she tries really hard with her spellings. In fact, she's come to fear her father's anger, disappointment, judgment so much that she applies this tactic to many areas in her life now, such as her dance classes, her orderly bedroom, her neat and tidy hair, and her photos on social media. With time, this tactic becomes a behavioral trait, which in turn becomes a personality trait. And we may call this being an overachiever. Being an overachiever is a manager part in internal family systems. And manager behaviors are designed to keep us safe by managing how we appear to others, helping us avoid other people's reactions and emotions by manipulating situations that we find uncomfortable. If you can keep others calm, then they won't point their painful emotions at you, and you won't have to experience painful emotions inside. So other manager parts include perfectionism, people pleasing, over apologizing, over explaining, and self-minimizing. And all of them work at the situational level to prevent having to feel feelings that you can't cope with. Now, what do I mean when I say working at the situational level? Imagine the same little girl now as an adult in an office job, and her boss is unpredictable, critical, and quick to temper. She receives some email feedback from him about a report she's written. Her response is to do everything she can to keep him and his nervous system calm, because she just can't handle it when he gets angry. His anger makes her afraid. And so what she does next is all that she can to manage at the situational level so that he doesn't get angry and she doesn't have to feel painful emotions inside. So after she's read his feedback, she not only tweaks the report to take into account what he said, she ends up thinking the whole thing isn't as good as it could be and wants to rework it. She stays in the office until very late and returns early the next day. On seeing her boss, she is effusive and complimentary and overly apologetic. In moments, she finds herself gushing at him and guffawing at his jokes, and she just can't seem to stop herself. Her nervous system is up the wall, and after the meeting, she feels exhausted. In this example, I've highlighted how the woman's overachieving tendencies interact with her nervous system, showing how a particular part of her personality takes control, drives her behavior, and in turn is a part of a cycle of dysregulation. And I'll come back to this example in a moment, but I just want to draw your attention to how your nervous system can hijack your thoughts and turn them into a tool that acts in service to dysregulation and coping mechanisms. So let me take a step back for a moment just to help line up some clarity. And that's to say, I once saw a presentation with a woman holding a brain. Now, what was interesting was that the brain wasn't the shape that it's often portrayed in images, the kind of the oval shape. From the underside of it was a long, pale, floppy column that extended downwards, sort of like a living root. And it was sort of something that continued, something that reached downwards and connected and communicated outwards. The whole thing spanned from where you know your brain to be all the way down to where our lower backs are, sort of around the coccyx position. I realized that what I was really seeing was the true picture. It was the brain and the spinal cord together without being separated. So, in other words, it was the whole of the core central nervous system. And when you really think about that, it can change the way you understand yourself. So the brain isn't just a 3-pound organ sitting in isolation thinking up thoughts. It's a part of the whole body. In fact, it's receiving signals about such things as muscle tension, breath, heart rate, and other physiological shifts in safety or threat. So when your nervous system is dysregulated, the brain is responding to a stream of internal data that says something isn't right. And this communication serves up further physiological shifts. The body tightens, the breath shortens, the system becomes alert, and the brain, woven into all of this, begins to generate thoughts that match that state. So it's likely scanning, predicting, worrying, and protecting. Seen this way, thoughts are not just happening in your head. They're a mirror to or a voice of your entire nervous system. So it's no surprise really that an anxious nervous system generates anxious thoughts, or a depressed nervous system generates sad thoughts. If your nervous system is activated and scanning for danger, your mind will be producing thoughts that match that state. So in the case of our example, the lady will be thinking, what if he gets angry? What if I can't cope? What if I get fired? And if her nervous system is more on the shut down side, the depressed, low energy side, her mind will be thinking thoughts like, well, what's the point if he doesn't like the report? This whole company is just a waste of time, or I don't have the energy to change the report again. So can you see how our nervous system is setting the context for the thoughts we're having? Here's another really interesting consideration. So thoughts are not only consequences of the state of the nervous system, they also act in service to the coping mechanisms or parts that have developed over time that work to prevent us from feeling painful emotions. So take the overachieving part. It uses thinking to predict, to plan, and to control, and would have thoughts that sound something like, oh, this formatting of this report looks awful. He may pick up on that too. Or the image on the second page, that could be so much better. I'll just have to stay late today. I might be tired tomorrow, but I'll push through. There's so much strategizing and scenario planning and just trying to close every possible gap for potential anger from the boss. So the mind becomes a tool, not just of the nervous system, but of the protector parts trying to keep you safe. Do you see at this point how far from peace of mind you really can be? So, back to the example. The problem here is that she is fighting with reality. The boss is prone to outbursts of anger in general. And the important development for her is to learn that feeling her fear about his outbursts is painful but not dangerous. And this is where practicing our allowing and somatic experiencing comes in, because it helps us to not be afraid in situations where people are pointing big, emotional, powerful feelings directly at us. It helps us to be okay when those situations happen. We know that we'll be safe. We know that we may not feel so good inside, but we know that we can get through it. And with time, we stop all of this energy and planning that we put into managing at the situational level. Because, life is full of uncertainty and death, illness, arguments, and failure. And it's important to understand that we are literally built to be able to experience emotions such as anger, sadness, and fear that come with all of that. Living constantly with tactics is what causes chronic, long-term fear of the primary emotions such as anger and sadness and fear. Okay? So this is why I always add a somatic or allowing element to my meditations, because there's no point in understanding your parts and their coping mechanisms to then use more tactics or more coping mechanisms to heal your way out. We need to feel. And I just wanted to make sure I included that, because allowing, and our thoughts are so woven and interlinked that I just couldn't give you a video about thoughts without touching on that. But I'll get back to thoughts now, because one of the most important shifts, in addition to allowing, is to stop assuming that every thought is useful or even true. So when a thought appears, it often arrives with such a sense of authority, as if it's reporting reality. But in many cases, especially in a dysregulated nervous system, it's doing something else. It's catastrophizing, crystal ball gazing, scenario planning, or even, that rehearsing. Your thoughts are shaped by your current state, your history, your coping mechanisms, and what your nervous system believes is necessary for survival. So rather than treating thoughts as facts, it's often wiser to see them as proposals, something being offered up, not something that you have to agree with or engage in. From that perspective, you don't have to enter into a conversation with every thought that arises. You can begin to relate to thoughts more like passing options, thinking, is this helpful? Is this one true? Is this one needed right now? And if not, you can let it dissolve. And the practice that helps us to do that are meditations such as VIPASSANA or Zen. And they just help us have such a healthier relationship with thoughts. I wanted to take a moment now just to give you 5 points to consider. Some of you may have heard this before, and for some people, for a lot of people, it will be revolutionary. And you know what? It really does not only help you to heal, but for you to have a completely different type of life. So, number 1, you are not your thoughts. Thoughts are a tool that your mind uses to help you in certain ways. So if you think about it, when you're asleep with no thoughts, you are still you. And when you are zoned out with no thoughts, you are still you. So what I'm trying to do is to ask you to think about seeing thoughts more as a tool that you can use, as opposed to thinking that they are you. I'm trying to ask you to decouple them. So let's use speech as an example, because I think most people would agree that speech is a tool that we can use. And I want to try to show you how similar thoughts are to speech. So let me say that speech is a tool and speech is not you. Sometimes you talk and sometimes you don't. And if I were to ask you to talk all day, you would end up filling a lot of that time with just drivel and nonsense, just to be able to speak all day, because it would be impossible to fill the space with coherent speech continuously. And you would likely also get a headache and feel exhausted. So just as an experiment, if I now take that same paragraph and switch out speech for the words thoughts or thinking, let's see how it works. So thinking is a tool that you have. Thoughts are not you. Sometimes you think, sometimes you don't. If I were to ask you to think all day, brackets, which we do when we have trauma, close brackets, you would end up filling a lot of the time with drivel and nonsense just to be able to think all day, because it would be impossible to fill the space with coherent thinking continuously. You would also likely get a headache and feel exhausted. So, do you see how thinking has sort of gotten out of control, especially for people with CPTSD or PTSD? And it's become a habit that we use far too much. So why not observe your thoughts today? Carry out a little test and decide for yourself how useful are the thoughts that you're having. How much did they act in service to your coping mechanisms? And if you have anxiety, depression, or anger management issues, how much did they act in service to those? Number 2, with consistent practice in meditation, you start to see thoughts as events in awareness rather than instructions you must follow. You create a small but crucial space between the thought and your response. In that space, there's choice. The thought that first pops into your awareness is not a choice. It will appear. But after that moment, you have the option to continue or to stop. This is an incredibly simple, powerful, and life-changing insight that will help you to level up not only in healing, but in life in general. But that said, it's not easy. It requires sustained practice and discipline, but it is very doable. It's very possible. But just remember, if you give this 5 minutes worth of practice, you will receive 5 minutes worth of prowess. But if you give this 1, 2, 3 years or more of practice, then you will receive such a great level of proficiency. Number 3, over time, something else begins to happen when you regularly meditate. The amount of thinking that you do will reduce. Not because you're forcing thoughts away, but because you're no longer feeding them with constant attention and engagement. The system starts to settle, and as it settles, you become much clearer about which thoughts are useful and which are simply echoes of stress or habit or fear. You can feel the difference, not just mentally, but in your body. Certain thoughts contribute to a dysregulated nervous system. They increase activation and perpetuate cycles such as depression or anxiety. So if you're hoping to increase your resilience and your capacity, start meditating. Number 4, I wanted to talk about allowing and how you're probably experiencing intensely uncomfortable sensations. If we take anxiety, for example, you're allowing fear whilst being afraid of fear, and all for the first time in a long time. So allowing means your body will be moving through physiological processes. So there will be a rise in cortisol and adrenaline, an increased heart rate, perhaps muscle tension and disrupted sleep, and just feeling how anyone would feel if they were incredibly afraid. But as I always tell you, these feelings are painful but not dangerous. And in moments such as this, when I talk about painful but not dangerous, do you see how important thoughts are and how important the neutrality part is in the process? When I often say, allow with neutrality and no story attached, this is the work I'm describing now. Accept that fear feels awful, and if you have a thought regarding it, which you will do, don't engage with it. And if you do engage with it, then practice and fail, practice and fail. Just continue, because the rewards are immeasurable. Number 5, as you practice, you will move beyond trauma and towards contentment. This is because you will experience longer moments when you are empty of thoughts and unaware of yourself. You will have trained your mind to be this way. This is fact, this is science, and you can put your faith in this and work diligently towards it through the hard times and the moments of despair. And as you practice, you'll gradually move beyond the grip of trauma and towards a state of peace. So with consistent attention, you will experience extended moments in which the mind is quiet, thoughts dissolve, and the usual sense of self recedes. Moments of pure awareness will be revealed. And neuroscience shows that certain meditation practices alter brain activity in areas such as the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, the default mode network, reducing stress responses and the habitual self-referential thought patterns that maintain anxiety, depression, and other forms of trauma. And cognitive neuroscience demonstrates that by observing thoughts without attachment, you weaken automatic fear and coping loops, communicating safety to your nervous system. On my channel, there are VIPASSANA and Zen meditations that I encourage you all to start using every single day. And with sustained daily meditation practices, these shifts can happen more quickly than you might expect. As your relationship to thoughts changes, your nervous system begins to spend more time in states of safety and regulation, which allows it to channel resources into rest and repair instead of what we know best, which is fight, flight, freeze, and flop. And that has a ripple effect. Chronic illness and pain associated with the trauma are now provided the body's medicine cabinet and have the opportunity to finally heal. So, my friends, that's the end of this one on thoughts just for today. And I do want to thank you for joining me on the Mind Body Mountain. And if you want YouTube to place this in front of other people who may also need to hear it, please give it some encouragement with a like, share or comment. And if you wish to support my channel, have a look at joining the membership. So, I wish you goodbye for now, and I'll see you on the next one.